introductions here, and
Okay.
then.
Hey, Phil. Hi. No updates. Yeah, how's it going?
Pretty good.
See, we're in the current issue of Cloud Bank.
Oh yeah. Those are he does such a nice job.
That's actually one of the few literary magazines I read cover to cover.
I know. He just
Yes, we were.
and and always got Kathy McGookie and he's a good guy.
We are going to get started. Hopefully that's loud enough. I don't know if we need this or not, but I always put it on because sometimes with like the air and everything going, it gets a little too loud. So anyway, welcome everybody to Peter White Public Library. Welcome to anybody who's watching on YouTube. My name is Marty Ackes. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for Peter White Public Library. And it's my great pleasure tonight to be able to introduce Phillip Sterling. But first I have to thank one group that allows us to do this live streaming, and that is the Friends of Peter White Public Library. They bought all of our equipment and pay for so much of what we do here at the library. So they're a great resource, and we're very thankful for the Friends. And by the way, the Friends used book sale is coming up at the end of September. That's one of our big fundraisers for the Friends that allow us to keep the money flowing in and also do all these wonderful programs. So I'll make you aware of a few things that are coming up this week and next week and the week following a little bit. On Monday, we have our next performance of Northwards in Music with B.G. Bradley, myself, and Big Lake Acoustic, and the actress Jackie Love. And our theme this time for this show, I think is pretty appropriate for the times in which we are. It's surrealism, so you're going to get a lot of surrealism during that show. And then if you've registered for our Craft Magic series on Tuesday night, we're going to be doing Punch Needle Magic with Lydia Taylor. The Poet Circle next Thursday, please make note of this if you are a poet and you come to that, is a little bit different because we're meeting a little earlier on Thursday at 5 p.m. We'll do workshops from 5 to about 5:45, and then we will have about a 45-minute open mic, and then after that, everybody can get in their cars and drive over to the Northern Center on campus to see our wonderful UP Poet Laureate Beverly Mathern and our Michigan Poet Laureate Monty Comer and their event next Thursday that starts at 7. If you're planning on attending that, please register for it. You do need to register for it. There's no price involved in it, but they are trying to get, I think, an idea of how many people are going to be showing up. And then next Friday, our docu-cinema starts up again this September. And in honor of National Suicide Awareness Month, we're going to be showing the documentary Facing Suicide, which shines a light on one of America's most pressing mental health crises, and trying to destigmatize the ideas, destigmatize suicide and mental illness in some way. And just to make you aware of a few other things that are going to be coming up, for film, we are going to be showing Alphonse Araujo's, I can never say his name, Araujo, Like Water for Chocolate. That's our global cinema. We do have our Blues Day Tuesday concerts. We do have a concert by the Knockabouts, a great local Celtic band. And we also are going to be showing films that have turned 40 or are turning 40 this year. And believe it or not, the first one in September that we're going to be watching, the film just turned 40 this year, is The Karate Kid. So I don't know if you can call him a Karate Kid anymore. It's more like the Karate Man or middle-aged man now. Anyway, please, I'm so excited to have Phillip here. I'm going to let him do most of his introduction and talk about his life and everything. But Phillip is really been instrumental in, he's the editor of the Poetry Society of Michigan's newsletter. He's done so much in his life, and this new collection, Lessons in Geography, is a collection of essays that he's written over the last 40 years about geography of the Great Lakes and the regions surrounding them. So please give a big Peter White Public Library welcome to Phillip Sterling.
Thanks, Marty, and thanks to the library for hosting this, and hello to people on YouTube, which is kind of a strange experience for me. People who know me know I don't Zoom and for other reasons, but I'm still stuck in the 20th century in a lot of ways. Now let's start with a poem, and then I'll try to do some disclaimers on what Marty said I was going to do. This is from my first book. It's called The Widower Tells Other Passengers Where He's From. Here, the hand's a lesson in geography. The right palm facing or the backside of the left, forested with pine-like follicles along knuckled hills and shoreline, veined with purple interstates. Notice in particular the extremities, thumb calloused by the hard-held farm, blunt and bruise-ruddied as a sugar beet, or the wounds and healings, the jagged scars our lumber dunes have scoured. For the hand will occasionally reach into mistaken places, pause dangerously in dreamy reminiscence, or grasp at reckless situations like perch dorsals. How we envy the other cousin, little finger nuzzled by the local myth of a sleeping bear, whose cubs will surely follow her to shore. So much of any place, she'd said, is pain, or being left in place, the place from where it spreads. Out of place, we know where we belong. We thrust our sufferable selves like peninsulas. And though our roads are paved with foreign gravel, asphalt, or cobblestones, even the sandy loam of late geologies, one hand may prod and pare another's fingernails, or twiddle thumbs, or sculpt peak steeples out of prayer. Another may hold its brief applause. The weather, too, is often found more tolerable than welcome. And now the title essay, where the title came from for Lessons in Geography, which is actually called Lesson in Geography, goes like this. The hand is a lesson in geography, claims the speaker. The hand is a lesson in geography, claims the speaker of my poem, A Widower Tells Other Passengers Where He's From. He's from Michigan. And so in response to the typical follow-up questions, where in Michigan? I pictured the funny thing is I went into the grocery store over here, and the woman looked at my driver's license because I bought a beer or something, and she said, "Where's Lowell?" So I didn't show her on my hand, but I just said it's from Grand Rapids. I can show you where that is on my hand. I picture him flattening his right hand against the thin membrane of his personal space, fingers together, but thumb slightly extended like a kitchen mitt, the gesture that's second nature to all native Michiganders who travel beyond the Great Lakes. Here, he'd say, stabbing with his left-hand index finger approximately where his hometown is located on the palm of his upraised right hand, the anatomic metaphor of our state's topography. Or the backside of the left, the poem continues, forested with pine-like follicles along knuckled hills and shoreline, veined with purple interstates. I imagine he's a retired farmer who has somewhat reluctantly began to travel at the behest of his wife, recently deceased. Traveling was something he'd always promised her they'd do, eventually, though they'd neglected to take the time from the seasonal demands of his occupation or in the healthful years of his wife's home economics, household management, and mothering. Then, when she grew older and ill, he promised they'd travel when she got better, but it never happened. Now he joins third-ager tour groups visiting the most foreign places, those not likely haunted by the ghostly memories of a homestead and life together. He travels out of loneliness and guilt, out of grief. And it's at one particular instance of his geographic identification of home, demonstrating to a cluster of college alumni on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean, say, or to an American couple he encounters among a wash of pigeons at Piazza San Marco, that he considers his hand more objectively. Notice, in particular, the extremities. Thumb calloused by the hard-held farm, blood blunt and bruise-ruddied as a sugar beet, or the wounds and healings, the jagged scars our lumbered dunes have scarred. In the academic year of 1992-93, when I taught as a Fulbright lecturer at the University of Liège in Belgium, I found myself repeatedly locating my hometown of Big Rapids on the palm of my right hand. Just so. It's right about there. In one instance, I meant to promote topographical awareness to my third-year American Civil Relations students. In another, the gesture satisfied the curiosity of suburban Waterloo expatriates who were hosting a Fulbright reception. More often, mapping my hometown on my hand was simply a way of pandering to the casually intimate, friendly face in a foreign crowd tourist we'd encountered during our continental meanderings. It was a gesture of second nature to me, a native Michigander who had engendered the handy visual aid during multiple orientation icebreakers at various colleges within the United States, a practice that most Americans could not imitate. For the Nebraska and Kansas classmates I'd met one year at Hastings College, for example, or the Kentucky and Georgia natives I'd studied with for my 3 years at Center College, or the Buckeye-bred Ohioans at Bowling Green State University, there was no part of the body one could use to point out the location of Americus or Grand Island or Belgium. The fact is, every time I trace the map of my right hand, I am more astonished by how my anatomy duplicates the expansive waterways and landforms of sand and copper-rich rock that were left in the retreat of the last local glacier, which gave up what we now call Michigan about 11,000 years ago. If I cup my right hand loosely under a small stream of rainwater, the runoff will follow my lifeline east to west, the route of the Muskegon River, until it empties off the shore of my palm, where Lake Michigan should be. A crease below that one leads west to east, along the path of the Chippewa River and into the Saginaw, which feeds the bay I've created with the space between my thumb and forefinger. Back across the state and slightly north, at the base of my little finger, there is a Platte Lake-sized gap between the fleshy pads of that small digit and my ring finger, and I can easily make out the Platte River as it wends its way past Waterwheel Grocery Store and Miller's Canoe Livery and along Benzie State Park to its mouth, which during spring thaw and smelt dipping would be raucous with waiter splash, lantern hiss, net slap, and curses. And then there's a paragraph in here that says, I'm thinking backwards in time, as well as westerly for the development of Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore in the 1970s caused Miller's and the Waterwheel to be federally appropriated and summarily closed, leaving the sole tourist enterprise, the Park Service monitored, seasonally leased Riverside Canoe and Tube Rental. The former primitive sites-only Benzie State Park has been transformed into a national campground with RV hookups, and the smelt population, reduced in large part by the interdiction of coho salmon as a way to curb AOYs has yet to recover. So obviously, my memory has been affected by the changes over the years. The thing about memory is never wrong. Other things may change, but just there, on the outside of my, just there, where the Platte River empties, on the outside of my palm, below where the dunes hunch like a sleeping bear, somewhere south of Empire, I have an inch-long scar that I acquired from the time we lived at a cottage on Platte Lake. It is one of several, in fact. Another, a small, whitish, lumpy nub, which may still harbor a fragment of storm window glass, pegs Lansing just east of the center of my grasp. To the north, Mackinac City is an obvious smudge on police blotters, a thickly sliced heel over on my middle finger, which my mother says I got when I stuck it in a pump and lost part of it. It plays havoc for if you ever want to play guitar or banjo. A lengthy, narrower scar runs down along the Lake Huron shore of my index finger like a circle to her highway, while a crimp of skin the size and shape of I-275 circumnavigates where greater Detroit would be in the southeastern corner of my palm's heel. And even below the wrist of my state line, a fat bulge of hairless flesh rises like a surprise of white hills somewhere along the Indiana-Illinois border, halfway between Indianapolis and Champaign. Many of these landmarks, or should I say handmarks, are the consequence of adolescent recklessness, youthful rural sporting in the days before cable TV, slot cars, or 8-track tapes, let alone videos, Nintendo, or cell phones. They are memorable in the way punishment is, especially when one is punished for a wrong he didn't commit. Like the day I shoved my hand through the glass of a storm door. As with most trauma, the details of what led to that incident are less clear than those of the aftermath. Yet I've always felt family dynamics and birth order are partially to blame. While my brothers and sisters and I totaled 6, the father off to war gap between Margaret and Richard, third and fourth child, respectively, had created a situation where we were, for all practical purposes, 2 families, 3 older siblings and 3 younger. In that respect, I was not only 5th of 6, but the middle child of the second wave, 3 boys. Richard, older, and Kenny, younger, on either side. And a half generation younger than my sister Judy, the middle child of the first wave. By the time we'd moved to Platte Lake in the early 1960s, my oldest brother Robert was already married and serving the Army overseas. Judy was attending Kalamazoo College and Margaret was in high school. During my formative years, except for summers and holidays, we children were pretty much just the 3 boys, and often referred to as such. As such, we were a handful. I wouldn't necessarily call us wild, not like the 3 delinquent Sullivan boys up the road, whom we pretty much tried to avoid except for Cub Scout meetings and that one BB gun fight in the woods by the logging trail when Richard took a hit above his left eyebrow. Yes, nearly got his eye shot out. But we were boys, after all, intended to give our babysitters and our sisters boyfriends moments of aggravation. The night in question was one of those nights. Margaret recalls it as a sore point in her relationship to Dad, in quotes. Since she'd been left behind to manage our heady resistance to bedtime while he and Judy, home from college, had gone fishing. I remember only that we were either told to stay in the house but went out, or were told to stay out and snuck back in. And that we were using for our ins and outs not only the front porch door and the back kitchen door of the gray clapboard cottage, but the low, loose screen bend windows of our bedroom as well. We could push the screens out and climb in and out the window. Whatever the initial circumstances, the game eventually became one of tease and rout, in and out, with Margaret the woeful target, the it of 3 rambunctious boys. In a kind of tag or hide and seek or queen of the cottage, Margaret was trying to capture us, and we taunted her by running past as she corralled 1 or 2, but she could not get all 3. At some point in our game, as I was racing to get into the kitchen, launching up the back steps, I must have underestimated my velocity, for when I reached the storm door, which Margaret had perhaps locked, my right hand crashed through the glass. I screamed and yanked my hand back out through the shattered glass with an immediacy I've since witnessed only in video reversal. Poor judgment on my part, to be sure, as the exit likely caused more damage than the entrance. But it hurt. I remember a lot of glass shards and blood on the threshold and hemp doormat, on the kitchen linoleum, and in the sink. Blood that my sister couldn't, at the time, stomach very well. Later, she would become a nurse. Bleeding that couldn't be stopped. Since Margaret could not yet drive, nor could she leave my brothers unattended for any length of time, she phoned our Aunt Sue, a health and physical education teacher certified in first aid, who rushed over from my grandmother's cottage down the lake and transported me to the Frankfurt Hospital, where I received the first stitches I'd ever gotten. What I later learned to call quirky, 4 of those stitches went into my hand at geographically the same relative location as Frankfurt is on Michigan's map. 4 others went into my wrist, where the skin had pulled open enough to reveal a bulge of muscle, something I recall that simultaneously interested and nauseated me. Something that, due to the stitch's premature removal and subsequent flesh yawn, is a bulge of scar tissue to this day. It's not coincidence that poets define their lives in terms of physical objects, especially those that manifest familiar metaphorical qualities. The fragility of human existence is glass-like, able to shatter under certain pressure, yet for all its thin transparency, it is solid nonetheless, and nonetheless beautiful for both its surface and shatter, its drama and destruction. How often in films or TV dramas do we see the image of a body flying through a glass door or window, exploding walls of glass, the brilliant, unnatural sounds of it, replicated as a way to mark a climactic moment, a moment of significance, of passion, change, or finality, of metaphor. How often is it, in the same time displayed in slow motion, visually gorgeous cinematography, in contradistinction to the character's obvious trauma? The widower in my poem, and considering his hand as the location of home, recounts his scars, which would be numerous, as anyone who's lived or worked on a farm would be able to attest. In doing so, he recounts as well the memories of hidden wounds, what are sometimes called emotional scars. For the first time, perhaps, the widower realizes that distance will not remove those, that no matter how different the places are that he visits, cobblestone streets, barge canals, Gothic cathedrals, or how different the people he meets, his hands will always be a physiological record of his life, a legend, say, of luck and circumstance, of location and occupation. In contemplating our hands, we may see our accomplishments, our triumphs, our accidents, our mistakes, our losses. In such contemplation, may we also note, beneath the typography of flesh, the poem of our being, moments of melancholy or nostalgia, stories of satisfaction and contentment, even happiness. Scars are, after all, what's left from healing. There are a dozen or more smaller scars on the palm and wrist of my right hand from incidents of boy play and restlessness during the time we lived in the cottage on Platte Lake. scars from a relatively happy time of a relatively happy childhood. Over the years, I've added numerous other scars, in addition to countless mental and emotional souvenirs of broken bones and contusions, of heartache and loss, mementos of other times. They are scars, I think now, as much of place as incident. The essay comes in the book towards the end, excuse me, after you get an essay about growing up in Platte Lake in Benzie County, and after the big essay in here, which describes my breaking my neck while in a swimming accident, in a stupid swimming accident, which is really a fun essay. You'll have to read it. Yeah. But this idea of, when I was putting this together, I said this a little bit, but these are essays that I've written over a number of years, as Marty said, and the book says. And when I was putting the book together, I was thinking how there are really two themes in all the essays, even though they're quite different. There's an essay about my mother's canoe money, and there's an essay about my potato chip truck starting on fire, and there's an essay about gutting my first deer at the age of 30-something. And, there's all sorts of different things going on here. They're all about, relevant to my memory, my growing up, and they all in some way touch on poetry. And it wasn't until later that I realized that these essays, because I always kind of kept it separate. As a teacher, if you were teachers, we have to do a certain amount of academic writing, and so I was doing that, critical writing. And then I was doing these, and some of these essays in different times in my life that appeared in newspapers and a more general literature, literary journals. And then, but they all, and I kind of thought the poetry was something else, doing something else. But then I found out that it's all part of the same thing. It's all coming together, and it's all part of who I've been, which is where the poem, where the book starts, is that growing up where I did on a Platte Lake in Benzie County, and then in Traverse City, which was really still rural. It wasn't the Traverse City we know now, but back in the 1960s. That's what's played a role in my becoming a writer, being a writer, and being interested in poetry. And but then I was talking about glass, and there's more than one instance in these essays where there's breaking glass, and I thought that was kind of odd. And then I started to think about it. The one putting my fist through the window at Platte Lake was one thing, but while we lived at Platte Lake, and this is not in the essays, and I hope you can't verify this, but some of our friends, a guy we knew down the lake, his last name was Warden. I don't remember his first name. I do remember his sister, because his sister had a crush on me. But his father must have complained about them building a new house. Some guy bought a piece of property not on the lake, but behind them, and was building a house. And nobody can understand why he would want to build a house and cut the woods down and build a house when it's not on the water. And so the young boy and I, and my brother Kenny, went over and when they were building the house, we threw a bunch of rocks through the windows, and which my father.
You broke them?
Yeah, oh yeah, we broke them. Which my father had to do some, the police showed up,
Oh my God.
I thought nobody ever knows, but the other kid, you know, he told on us. But there was an earlier incident that I vaguely remember when we lived on Pine Lake. We lived on Pine Lake in Bloomfield Hills for the first 7 or 8 years of my life, and then we moved up north. And that's you'll find that on the book. But I vaguely remember another incident where I had chucked some stones at some windows, and but it was a boathouse, like an abandoned boathouse. It wasn't like a new house that somebody was building. It was down the road, and it had been, you know, half the windows were broken already, and so I just, you know, chucked a couple more rocks in there and probably broke a couple windows. And then on the way back, coming up, I can picture myself coming up the front lawn, and I had this vague memory, and maybe it was a dream, that some deep voice called my name. You know, it was like, Phillip. I thought, ooh. But nobody ever found out about that one, so it's maybe apocryphal. One speaks of penance. Somewhere in the voice imagined is the voice heard. And somewhere in our climbing stairlight into dusk, the dusk spills downhill from a fond summer home, a porch screened in year-round. Somewhere in winter thunder we hear our name. Thick stones slip from mighty fingers at the sound. And somewhere in our Father's voice we hear our mother's voice. Somewhere in our mother's voice we sit and pick at scabs of chicken pox and watch as summer grows fat and fatter. Somewhere early bullfrogs swallow, and somewhere in the silence that follows we know better. A whisper of wrongdoing in the shatter of boathouse glass. How afternoon warms into abandonment. How solitude throbs in the off-season, where a steel dock rusts, twisted among willow slips. Somewhere a voice calls as we are coming back, calls like ice across the lake at wind shift, closes in on the first dock in the water every year, where we stand and fend with shovels and rakes, called to from the breakfast table, called to as to the memory of tongue flesh adhesive to cold metal. Somewhere snow growls, and it's May. Reckless as thunder, a gift opened prematurely. And somewhere we hear the voice again. Not a God's voice, though we'd have thought so at first, but a voice of all we did when we shouldn't have, and all we knew, and in that knowledge, all we expect to be told again. Wanting to hear what we've already heard, to hear a voice from somewhere. And that poem appears in Local Congregation, my latest collection of poetry that came out last October, but this is the first time it's ever been read from. So, and it seems to be a kind of companion book to the essays. Many of the poems kind of deal with the same idea. And then I had a plan, and I wrote it all out here, but then I started thinking maybe I need to change the plan. Because I was going to read the introductory essay that talks about how growing up where I grew up and living in Michigan, pretty much my whole life, except for the times when I went to college or was in Europe or something, how valuable it was in terms of how inspirational that was in terms of becoming the kind of person that I am today, a writer, a But you don't really want to know about me. You want to know about poetry, right? So this is how I write poetry. First, I make sure I have enough gas. If I don't, I take the 1 gallon can to Wesco and put $1 worth of unleaded into it. While I'm there, I might buy a candy bar and flip to the most recent magazines. Next, I check the oil. If the dipstick is dry, I add enough 10W30 to bring the level up to the crosshatch safety zone. If I don't have enough oil, I'll run over to AutoWorks and buy a quart. I may also stop at Great Lakes Books to see what may be on sale. After I get home, I empty the plastic kids pool of rainwater and drown yellow jackets and move it off the grass. I make sure the lawn chairs, frisbees, soccer balls, bikes, and sandbox toys are either on the deck or in the driveway. I coil the garden hose and cover the sandbox with a blue tarp. About then, Andrew, my 4th child, will want to push on the swing, so I'll invest a few minutes in teaching him to pump with his legs, calculating the day when he'll swing by himself, the return on my investment. Sarah will come outside to hang upside down in the bars and ask me if she can see if Robin can play, but I'll remember that Rachel needs to be taking the piano lessons, so I'll load into the caravan any kids that can't be left at home alone, and I'll deliver Rachel to Mrs. Wismer's. Fortunately, I don't need to stay. Debbie will pick up Rachel on her way home from work. Back at the house, Matthew needs help subtracting decimals. Sarah is off on her bike. Andrew wants someone to play Legos with him. But when am I going to cut the grass, I ask rhetorically. Matthew volunteers to play Legos with Andrew. So I return to the yard. My second-hand Sears Power Mower starts easily if I remember to pump the choke 15 or 20 times. Then, for the next couple hours, give or take a half dozen stops to scribble a phone message or throw a pot roast in the oven or mix Kool-Aid, I will push and pull, grunt and groan, cough and sneeze, curse, and essentially ignore everything but the mowing. For the better part of those 2 hours, the roar from the engine will muffle most distractions, and what the kids call my mad eyebrow facial expression will dissuade all but the most serious of interruptions. Should the muse want to reach me, that is to say, my phone lines are open. I call it writing. I'll do anything in order to avoid facing the stare of cotton dye. I'll clean the oven, fold socks, I'll return books to the library, or make a special trip across town for guinea pig food. I've even been known to remodel a house completely, inside and out, from shingle to subfloor, in order to avoid writing. I'll take the kids to the pool or beach because they deserve it, is my excuse, or to the ice cream store, or to Paris Park to feed the trout. I'll cut coupons out of newspapers. I'll go to the neighbors and borrow their newspapers in order to cut out the coupons. Anything to avoid writing at home. In contrast to the advice of many professional writers, like journalists and novelists, who argue that a person should write regularly every day, I tell a person who wants to write poetry to stop writing altogether. Cold turkey, like giving up cigarettes. If you're lucky, you'll never write another poem. Your life will be free of addiction. That is to say, you'll have no grass to cut, like a perennial day at the beach. But if you're unlucky, if you're meant to be a poet, you'll never make it. Every book at the consignment store will raise your arm hairs and goose flesh. Every blank notepad will sing. Every beat from the keyboard or click of a typewriter will cause you to break into a cold sweat. Writing will weigh upon your heart like sickness. Eventually, you'll have to sneak off to cop a poem or sell your sleep to shoot up a story. Of course, you'll curse the cursed need to write, at which your loved ones will sigh, and then you'll give in to it completely and write and rewrite as though you'd never write enough. That's what happens when we avoid writing if we're in true writers. There's no release. Our avoidance itself becomes a squeak in the ear buzz of our mowing, a word, a phrase or two, a rhyme, a couple lines, and before we know it, we're chanting among the scattered heads of dandelions, throwing our grassy excuses to the wind. No amount of wanting will make a writer write. Instead, like pregnancy, the more we want it, the more difficult it seems to become. So I say, avoid it. If the writing comes, it will come when it's ready, magically, mysteriously, with sublime awe. If we ignore it, if we don't allow it to make its demands upon us, if we keep ourselves busy, the poems will come. When they're ready, when we least expect them, a word or phrase will break water into being, cry out, and gulp its first breath of air. Resign yourself to it, I say. Your busy, demanding life will never be the same. How am I for time?
You got another 15 minutes or so?
Okay. Okay. Again, I'm sorry for that. I had a plan, but the plan isn't going to be panning out very well. Let me read another short one. The last essay in the book, I wrote after the book was done, although I've been working on a draft of it for 15 years or so. But it's why I haven't written more. I have been writing poetry since high school, and publishing since I was in college. But I didn't publish my first book, this book, until I was almost 50 years old. And so that essay explains my journey as a poet. And so the fun thing about this book is it doesn't really take you, it sort of takes you chronologically, but it takes you more memories of my childhood, and then memories of living with a family and poetry, and then and some of the, I said already, some of the transgressions that you probably don't need to know about, but you will after you read this. You know the poem, The River Merchant's Wife, Ezra Pound? Yeah, everybody familiar with that? I should have brought it, but this is titled Monkey Business. I step onto the deck I built off the back of my house years ago, and for the first time noticed that there are no monkeys in my trees. There are no calamus monkeys, no capuchin-like monkeys, no spider, woolly, or howler monkeys, and no macaques. I return inside, retrieve my binoculars from the dining room table, and step out again to confirm it. There are no signs of monkeys in any of the maple, willow, evergreen, flowering crab, or thorn apple trees in the quarter acre behind the house. Nor are there monkeys in my oversized oak, which not only defines the far edge of my rowdy yard, but stands well above the rest. I'm astonished. I've owned this property in Big Rapids Township for the better part of 18 years, and it is only now that I've taken to notice the absence of monkeys. The reason it suddenly occurred to me must be a literary one. What had launched me into the deck in the first place, what had caused me to search for small primates among the branches of my familiar trees, was Ezra Pound's poem, The River Merchant's Wife, a letter, which I've been reading. I've taught Pound's poem dozens of times in my years of teaching, maybe more than dozens if I count the semesters I offered multiple sections of American Lit, and the years I used the poem in more than one semester, not to mention the times I've alluded to The River Merchant's Wife in community or public school poetry workshops. Yet in all that time, I'd never before considered the poem outside of the context in which I was teaching it. I'd never considered what I wasn't hearing. In Pound's poem, the monkeys make a sorrowful noise overhead. The line stands out for its poignancy, capturing with uncanny simplicity the sadness and longing that the river merchant's wife feels. Her young husband, whom she desires to mingle her dust with forever and forever and forever, has been gone for 5 long months, and she grieves his absence. It is an absence I'm familiar with. 5 months ago, I packed off to college the last of my 4 children, custody of which I won in the divorce, and so now live solitary among ghost laughs. I am convinced through the transliteration of the poem that Pound was familiar with such absence as well, regardless of the fact that, like myself, he may never have heard monkeys in the wild, and so really could not have known whether they were sorrowful or not. To be sure, the majority of Pound's readers would have very little experience with the emotive, let alone linguistic, meaning of the shrieks and grunts and hubbub of our specious cousins, given that our exposure is likely limited to the cacophony of monkey islands at various zoos or safari parks, or from the dubbed or canned monkey speak of Disney TV shows or Tarzan movies. And so, one might ask, how can I possibly know, as I do, what sounds the river merchant's wife hears overhead? I know because at times the trees in my yard make such noises. There are times, like today, when, in order to escape from the wrench of loneliness brought on by my solitary reading, I am jolted from my blue chair, and I seek some affirmation of being, if not belonging. I take to the deck and listen. In the slightest wind, my trees cry and moan, creak and whistle. It is the sound of the trees' empty branches. Like a dove's mournful coo, you might say. But no, it is not the sound of mourning, despite the dove's namesake, though some birds do make a noise like grieving widows. A trope I'd argue all too familiar in American backyards and literary texts. Granted, there is demonstrative sorrow in bird language, a sorrow of flocks and bevies, of gaggles and murders, a sorrow of dole and flight and piteousness, a sorrow of charm and fleet. And yet, in its very ubiquity, such sorrow is rife with self-pity and civic harmony. It is a public sorrow. It is not what I hear. What I hear is more exotic and unfamiliar, a noise that manifests itself so appropriately in Pound's image that I am moved by it, in part because I do not know what it is. Its absence charges my imagination. And yet, you interrupt, monkeys are among the most social of animals. Wouldn't dismissing birdsong for its antiphonal symphony, its aggregate suffering, require us to dismiss it as the communal dirge of a monkey, as well as the communal dirge of a monkey troop? Not necessarily, I will answer, for it is not the monkeys themselves who are sorrowful. It is the river merchant's wife. To her, the noise, a noise familiar to her, has suddenly become sorrowful. In literary terms, we call such projections pathetic fallacy. And I suppose that in Pound's poem, the image of the monkeys making sorrowful noise overhead could be excused as such. The monkeys are likely not making any different noises than they were before. What has changed is the river merchant's wife's perception. In her lover's absence, everything bespeaks of sorrow. The different mosses, the paired butterflies, even time. Consequently, accepting that the noises the monkeys make is suddenly recognized as sorrowful, if they hadn't always been, assumes on the reader's part an acceptance of the speaker's familiarity with monkey noise. What was once familiar is suddenly redefined in a way that makes it unfamiliar, makes it new, even startling. We find meaning where there hadn't been meaning before. We are moved by what we realize is not there. What we realize, of course, is poetry. It was then, when I considered how quiet the house was without my children, that I took to my deck and looked for the first time into my trees. There are no monkeys, and their absence makes a sorrowful noise. So I'll just finish up with a couple of short poems. Let me see if I pick something that's not too. Yeah, that's kind of fun. So this is there's a poem, there's a series of poems in the local congregation that was called Abeyance. The sequence, it was published as a limited edition chapbook in a contest, and then the poems, the whole chapbook ended up as part of this book. And in each one, I tend to do a lot of series of things, and the series based on either thematic or some kind of structural thing. One of the books that recently published back there, Short on Days, is our February poems. Each one is 28 words long, and I set out to do 28-word poems for 28 days, and then I did like 40 of them. I just got lost in the. So, there's different. In this particular case, the abeyance is in each of these poems. The poem is hanging between. There are other instances in this book that I talk about that kind of caught between two places. It's like I got hung up, but not really hung up. Anyway, they don't have titles. This is number 8. But again, it talks about poetry in our lives. A poem fills the space between her heart and mine. My tongue fills the space. And my heart-colored poppies, rupturing the mist beneath the thorn apple, fills the space. The fragile ash fills the space. The cedar, the angel-winged maple fills it. And the road that passes through them. And the car, the color of a wound. And the one bird that spirits the picture window like a bruise fills the space. The weight of lessons and of papers fills the space. The whiff of family fills it. The heft of death. Her breasts, her breath, and mine fills the space. My harried skin fills the space. And the slick silk of her white pajamas. And finally, if you allow me, this one, you may need an explanation of this because it talks about paper maps that fold and unfold. I don't see where people, you can pull out your phone and Google Maps and see what, not Google Maps, but the verb Google, paper maps, atlases, whatever. Anyway, some of you I know are teachers and mentors for poets, and sometimes receive probably requests, or you might be editors, and so receive poems in the mail. Right? So this is called Dear Poet, and thank you for having me. Dear Poet, I read what you sent, both sides of every sheet carefully, as the poems seemed fragile, so small and compact, like the moth feet of garden soil on snow. And what struck me after I had finished, late, After everyone had gone to bed, the sad news sung off the TV, and the trees under no moon were nowhere to be seen. Was how, no matter how I tried, I couldn't fold the pages right again, the way they came. Get them to fit the way you'd meant them to. I've had maps like that. Once Europe I borrowed folded backwards upon itself, as it had done so many times before, redefining its borders tolerantly. And once, when the states were new, stiff, unwrinkled, snapping in wind that swept engine heat here and beyond, I creased and recreased to no avail, lined up Pittsburgh with Phoenix, with St. Augustine, origami Lake Michigan into a blue hat. It was never like that before. Tucks flared and begged, untightened, reclined, stretched out on the car hood as if sunbathing. No, nor was back home any better, flipping open with force enough to knock over a glass, running my words into slurs. I've had to give up fold for rent. No matter how I try, and believe me, I have tried, again and again, tried to get them right, your poems just won't cooperate. I shuffle them, reshuffle, start from scratch. They will never, I'm afraid, be the same. Thanks, just the same. There's nothing I can do about it now. It's nothing you've done, really. There's nothing anyone can do. Without a map, you're never aware of being lost. It's like that. I just thought someone should know. Thank you.
Well, Philip's going to be selling his books back here. If you
Yeah.
have questions or want to talk to him. So, thank you so much, Philip.
Awesome.